from an authenticity perspective, from a rejecting the trope of a cold-blooded CEO who prioritizes profit over people, and operates very transactionally, and instead finding that the majority of founders I spoke with, all of whom have been successful in their own right, have led with a very authentic approach, have put people first, have talked about the benefits of leading with all of these positive characteristics that tend to get overshadowed or stomped on in corporate culture. And I've been in corporate culture, and it's fine. A lot of things get done. I was able to do a lot of good in previous positions at bigger companies, but I belong at the startup level. Most people who are listening also belong there. And those who are operating at a larger level are constantly looking, well, how can we innovate and how can we work with the generation of tomorrow? And what I've found is being yourself, being raw, being human, especially as we've transitioned to a virtual medium since COVID. This is the way to do it. This is the way to connect to people and to build relationships based on trust, and trust will allow you to lead at scale. So with all of that said, we were planning on talking to Brett Lassig tonight and his entrepreneurial journey with GetCover. And for those of you who may not know or who are not watching right now, this is a live show. And every now and then we have a misschedule and our guest doesn't show up. And we were sitting in the pre-show, Jesse and I, our producer, and we were talking about whether or not we should go live. And we decided, why not? The title is From Concept to SaaS, Brett Lassig's Entrepreneurial Journey with GetCover. This is very much the journey that I've taken with a number of different ventures, and very recently with my hearing health tech firm, Tonatop. And I figured, why not switch roles? We have the OG best interviewer herself backstage. Why can't I be the warm-blooded entrepreneur tonight? And why not try it on for size as an experiment and walk my own walk and try to share parts of my journey that have been successful or helpful for me and the things that I've learned for the audience to hear. I usually just host and monologue at the beginning and love to soak in the information from our guests, but why not be the guest tonight? So we're going to do it live. We're going to make a switch. And for those of you who have tuned in for Brett, I am sorry to disappoint. You're stuck with me tonight. If you want to tune out, I will understand. If you're excited by this, comment in the live show if you're here. If you have any comments, questions for me, if you're watching this after the fact, whether it's the things I say, whether it's questions for me later, comment them back in the post on LinkedIn where we go live from, or send me a message, whether it's on LinkedIn, email, and I'm happy to chat with you. So with that said, weird pivot tonight. I'm going to bring Jesse on, who is our producer and runs all of my LinkedIn shows. Jesse, it's so great to have you. Oh, you're on mute, Jesse.
See, I'm used to being in the background on these calls, but it's nice to be here, Chris. Pleasant surprise to be going live with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is live production, right? I mean, you do this all the time, and I know you don't deal with this challenge all the time. I won't call it a problem because sometimes life throws us lemons, right? But I'm going to take my notes. I'm going to throw them to the side because we've just switched positions today.
Exactly, and I get to interview you, and the world gets to learn more about Tonatop tonight.
Yes, which is exciting. I haven't spent enough time talking about Tonatop on LinkedIn. I have been involved very heavily in marketing and selling and getting the brand out there for XG partners this year because it's been a newer venture. It's something I've been very excited about, and it is founder focused. So it's made a lot of sense to drive the Warm Blooded Founders show to XG partners because that's where we help founders. And I have the opportunity to work with folks in a more one-on-one capacity or with the support of my team at XG Partners, where we're working more strategically, closing the vision to execution gap for founders who are going through different stages. Now, I've learned a lot from that journey, from this show, from being able to interview founders, as well as working through Exigy that I've applied in my Tonatop journey along the way. And inevitably, I mean, investors that we talk to, partners that we work with, they see me on LinkedIn. Most of my content is towards warm-blooded founders and Exigy, but I am so happy to share my journey with Tonatop and to talk about what it's like as a founder of a SaaS company alongside all the other things that I'm doing. So I'm excited to be here, Jesse, and excited to talk about it. I am
Me too,
unprepared.
Chris. Well,
When am I ever for these shows?
it means we're just going to be getting the real authentic answers.
Hopefully. Yes,
And,
hopefully.
if you think of something later, just go put it in the chat.
Yeah, perfect.
So let's get started with concept to SaaS. I'm excited to turn this around and, ask you about this. So like, what was that moment that made you realize Tonatop needed to exist? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jesse. So well, let me back up. So my professional training is in product management. I spent my first year out of university as a data analyst. I studied systems engineering. Very quickly at the startup I was in, there was an opportunity for me to move into product management, which I'm very grateful for because most people use an MBA to pivot into product management, or it just happens unpredictably but organically inside a growth trajectory of a larger organization. But I had the opportunity to pivot in early, and I owe a lot of my early growth to the patience and skills of my mentor and still friend Warren Drummond when I worked at UTTO, and I spent the majority of my time there learning how to run SaaS product management. We were interfacing with hardware, but it was mostly software and data solutions that we were building out. So learning from the ground up what it meant to be a product owner, then product manager, running Agile, keeping everyone from executives all the way down to designers and engineers aligned to what a plan was. And I just fell in love with that. I've always been good at connecting dots. I've always been curious as to how I can apply that skill outside of just product management. But right now where I'm at, I progressed in my career and I was working through a few different companies, one of them being Verizon. And I went to Verizon basically to prove that I could do to myself, but also to others, I could do product management at a higher level, maybe with a few more zeros around the end of the budget. And that lended the opportunity for a couple of different things to happen. One, I met a bunch of great colleagues, friends who I still speak with today and who challenged my thinking along the way. Two, it gave me the opportunity to soul search a little bit. When I was in startup mode, I was working nonstop all the time, justifying my existence, trying to drive the success of the company forward. It was all about survival. When I was in a corporate position, I was tasked to do certain things, but I was more cog in the wheel, let's say. And that gave me a chance to step back and evaluate, well, what do I want to do with the rest of my career and with the things that I value and find important? Do I want to stay and continue to grow this track? I can make a good amount of money. I could maintain a stable position going vertically at this company or another, or I could decide what to do next. And now I'm at the point where, around COVID, there were those questions were looming. And I started dating my now romantic partner at the time. And I found out in COVID very quickly, because we spent a lot of time together, that she had a hearing loss and it's genetic. So it started to appear in her late teenage years, early adult years. And there was a break in in the COVID social isolation period where we had a chance to go back out and to spend some time with my friends. And one of them who hosted us is actually my now fractional CFO at Tonatop. And we went up to Rye, New York, which is a short train from the city where I lived most of my 20s and during COVID. And I experienced a situation where, one, we were already socially anxious to be back in public and interacting with others. Two, we hadn't spent much time as a couple on public, and three, um, I hadn't experienced quite yet how Shanna's hearing loss would present itself in wider group experiences. I only really knew what I knew from isolated experiences with my grandparents, uh, literally down the hall right now, and the challenges they had, but I never thought past that. And I very quickly found out how challenging and confusing and difficult that experience was, on top of the anxiety that already exists in social situations when you are, uh, in Shanna's case, feeling disabled in terms of her ability to access information through her senses. And what I discovered there was just the complexities that exist in certain environments when there's music, crosstalk, um, jokes being made, auditory processing involved, all of that happening in real time. A lot of things that we take for granted, and saw firsthand how challenging that was for her, and the emotion it created. And I remember I knew she had hearing aids. I didn't know whether or not she had brought them or was planning on wearing them. I asked why she didn't wear them, and what she told me that night was, I'll never forget it, that her hearing aids didn't work in these types of situations. And I had one of those moments where it was an intersection of empathy and a light bulb from my product training of, you have just challenged a what I believe to be a law of nature here, or at least what I've been conditioned to believe, which was, I thought hearing aids solved hearing loss like prescription glasses, and it doesn't. And that led me down the rabbit hole, and then finding my business partner from the industry and building my team out. And now, years ago, taking something from a simple question all the way to bringing our product to market.
Wow. I'm putting in the comments, that was just a really touching story. And it's like sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. So I like that, not that she was experiencing that, but you guys both had that, experience of being able to learn from each other's perspective. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. And unfortunately, hearing loss is one of those conditions that, because it traditionally affects those later in life, it's assumed to be a part of aging. And we uh, typically don't lend, I think, a lot of empathy to those who are experiencing this. It's later in life. Those who experience it early at the pediatric level, they get a lot of care up front,
mm,
typically when the brain is still developing. You don't really hear about it because it's happening in the background at even earlier ages than teenage years. And
right.
things are typically resolved, right, or pushed in the full best practice direction. And what I've realized is, in this other half of the spectrum, which is adults or later stage adults, in age wise, there is more volume and less best practice care,
Mm,
because now you start dealing in the areas of insurance and what people are
mm,
willing to do, and differences in training and education, and what people have time for, and what patients are willing to accept as treatment or do at home, right? So I've learned that there's huge inconsistencies across the industry in terms of how this is treated. And then from ourselves as, let's say, advocates, consumers, right, those who have relationships to people with this condition, we take a lot of the symptoms and the solution paths for granted.
definitely. So when you think back to the earliest spark of the idea of tone and top, like, I'm assuming, it's related to the story, right, with Shanna. Am I saying her name right? It's Shanna, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, what problem were you, like, just personally obsessed with solving?
For me, it's there's the stigma, of course,
Mm,
because that first inhibited the conversations between her and
yeah.
I around her condition and when she wore hearing aids and what I needed to do, right? Unfortunately, there is a stigma from those who have it that they are a burden if they ask for support in their disabling situation for them to feel enabled to participate in the same way that someone without that condition would. This is a common issue for those who have disabilities. If they are not taught how to stand up for themselves and how to ask for what they need, or even to be told what they need, or to have that conversation with someone, you end up in situations where people just don't ask for it, right? So stigma, number one. Number two was, well, I wanted to figure out how I could close the gap that seemingly existed between what devices or solutions were out there today and what I thought was possible from a product or technology perspective, because that's the angle I was approaching things from at that point in my career. And I started down the route of, funnily enough, well, could we go smart glasses? Could we overlay real-time automated? This is before ChatGPT and everything, but could we overlay some sort of real-time captioning to allow another sense to accommodate for, the sense that is disabled? And so I started down this route, and then I realized, one, I can't compete with someone like Google on this, or Apple. I don't really want to, it's not smart from a product perspective to go and enter the hardware space. So I ended up attempting to find out more information about the industry. There's very little online. If you don't know what to look for, but also if you do know what to look for, I started to reach out to audiologists on LinkedIn and however I could find one that would be willing to talk to me. And it wasn't until I ended up searching on Apple Podcasts for audiology that I found my now business partner of 3 years, who happened to be the only audiologist who created a podcast and was willing to talk about, one, she interviewed patients and their journey. And I all of a sudden now had this perspective into the journey that Shanna and others like her have been through. I gained a perspective on how diverse those experiences were. And I started to pick apart more problems downstream in the industry. So I see an immense amount of problems. I don't think the North Star has changed in terms of destigmatizing and getting people down a solution path that works for them and returns their sense back to them in a more enabling manner. It is just the go-to-market point in which we've started that refined over time through discussion, strategy, of evolution in the industry, whilst I was working on other things and burning this in the background forward, which basically led us to the intersection of where we are today and where we're going now.
That's incredible. I love that. And I agree with David's comment too, but that he loves how passionate you are about this. I mean, I will admit, like, even in the beginning, when we first started working together, when you were explaining to me all your different businesses, because you're a serial entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
Tonatop always kind of resonated with me the most, if I'm going to be honest. And I don't know
Yeah.
if it's because like it's easier to understand maybe than the like business consulting or like other
Yeah.
things, or maybe because it has that personal story
Sure.
of, your partner, and this is like a real problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is sort of a really there's a spark in how you talk about it as well. And I think that's part of it. And since this topic is concept to SaaS, let's get into the technical part of it. Like in terms
Sure.
of Tonatop, what are you doing? That's a little different from the technology side. And how has it evolved from concept to SaaS?
Yeah. Great question. And David, shout out. Thank you for the comment. Yeah. Whenever I do talk about this, it does elicit a different type of passion. As I've spoken to a number of early stage pre-seed funds, seed funds, just general folks in the industry, angel investors, advisors, they all say that for the entry criteria for the founders they work with, there has to be some sort of story or connected passion, because this journey is hard, it is long. And for someone who to have the, let's call it the fortitude in order to stick it out, there has to be something that is driving you. And for some it's money, and that's fine. I'm not motivated by money alone, so that wouldn't create this type of reaction. It is a combination of, yes, of course there's financial upside for this, or else why take the risk? But Tonatop was the first opportunity I had come across in my entire career where it felt like there was a huge amount of commercial upside that would also create an immense amount of social good. And that social good and actually the financial upside could create that social good by disrupting the currently outdated or solving the current problems of the industry as it is today. And that is really exciting to me from a curiosity and a product strategist perspective of where the gaps in the industry and why are the things the way they are today. And where we ended up landing was we have two options. We can go to the consumer side of the market where 80% of people with a hearing loss are not doing anything about it today. They're living in a period of denial, and on average it takes someone 7 years to move out of acknowledgement into a seeking a solution path. Now, for the 20% who do, only 1 in 5 of those actually end up in a long-term solution. So one that is they may purchase a hearing aid, they may go down the cochlear implant route, whatever it is, they end up in something that allows them to restore quality of life and to reduce long-term health risks, such as the Achieve study that was released last year, which draws a correlation between untreated hearing loss in adults and early onset dementia. What we do know is causation, oral degeneration, that's AURAL, it impacts cognitive decline. It actually accelerates cognitive decline. It's because hearing is one of the few senses that lights up the entire brain. So when you think about lighting up the entire brain on a CT scan, that would be blood flow, right? Hearing is one of the senses that lights everything up. So if you can imagine you start to lose parts of that hearing, you will start to lose that blood flow firing to your brain, and dementia is effectively the loss of function as your brain starts to degenerate and you start to lose connectivity, and blood flow drives connectivity for us. So we decided we're going to go to where people are already treating their hearing loss today. We don't have enough budget as a company at this point to go after the consumer market. Way too saturated. Those who are already selling hearing aids, who have most of the money in the industry, are driving all their marketing dollars there. Right? We don't want to touch it. It would be a foolish business decision. So we're actually going to go, even though we want to impact that 80% top of the funnel one day and move them down to seeking a solution, we want to go to the 20% who are doing something about it and figure out why more aren't ending up in a long-term solution. So that was one of the biggest kind of, before we went out, go to market decisions that we had to make, was where's our entry point? And then because my co-founder is a clinic owner and ex-president of the American Academy of Audiologists in America, Dawn, if you're listening, I apologize if I got that wrong. She has so much experience with those 20% and what happens downstream. She knows the good eggs, the bad eggs, where people go wrong, all these things. She's done it for decades now, and she's led at the industry level. Who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, and where the industry is as a whole. So for us, it was about starting at the clinic level in a place where it would be fiscally or financially possible for us to collect a SaaS subscription fee in a way that would produce, I won't say growth revenue, but sustainable revenue for our business upfront. It would be a viable trajectory for us to be able to go out and to raise venture capital as a result of some of that early B2B data. The bar would be a little high in terms of the product requirements themselves and deploying into a HIPAA compliant environment, all these different things. But you take all those into account, and we've decided to start at that clinic level, and specifically in the oral rehabilitation function of an audiologist, as well as in the patient engagement side. So I could continue to talk about that, but I will pause, Jesse, in case you want to take me in a different direction.
I mean, maybe, I think this is all really interesting, but I do think we should break it up. And I'd love to hear from the audience too. Like, what other questions do you all have as we're getting into this? Because it is sort of like, I'm glad you mentioned earlier, you didn't want to compete with like Apple and Google, and I could see how, that could be like floating on people's mind, is like, how do you really stay competitive in this landscape? But I also know we want to get to your entrepreneurial journey with Tonotop. So like, maybe we can kind of transition there a little bit with like, I don't know, what was the like, how did you like, we got into the concept of how you started Tone Top, but in terms of
Yeah.
your journey, how has it differed from your other businesses? And like where were you in life when this started off? And, obviously that had a huge impact on it because, you learned about it through Shanna. So
Yeah.
just talk to us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey with Tonotop.
Sure. So Tonotop was one of the, if not the first, like real idea I had that I said to myself, I could see myself going off, starting this company, pursuing it full time. I had ideas, but nothing that I was committed enough to actually pursue myself. And that had been burning over the last 3 to 4 years. I was in a place where I was still growing my career and I wasn't sure what skills, if any, I continued to need to build before I went off and did this. There's no good playbook for this. It's part of the reason why I started the show, was to try to give people a bit more information about what it's like to be a founder and what you need to decide for yourself before you actually embark on this journey, and how committed you are to it, because it does take a lot of time. It is incredibly stressful. And how I actually ultimately ended up pivoting into Tonatop at the level that I needed to was I had to experience a downturn in a different business to feel like I had the both, I guess, the time and the energy, as well as the mental shift to put myself into this full time. And my co-founder and I got together and we basically said, look, we're ready to get serious about this. And that was about maybe a little bit over a year and a half ago. And then um, I hired a fractional CFO, good trusted friend of mine, brought on an advisor, consulted a fractional head of products, old mentor of mine. And, we got to work and we put together a fundraising plan, early pitch deck, all of these different things. I mean, I've been through, my fellow founders out there know this. It's like hundreds of iterations of that thing, hundreds of iterations of our go-to-market plan, business plan, all these
But
different things. And, it's been a challenging but fulfilling journey to then take the leap into entrepreneurship full time. And I've
mm,
had a number of guests on my podcast who shun venture capital. I can understand why. I mean, there are horror stories, right, that people go through. But for me, it's more about knowing what you're getting into. I heard in a recent podcast with the fund, they're working on a new asset class that is akin to venture capital, but is more about creating short to medium term incentives for investors to capture dividends, so that there wasn't so much of an emphasis around a 5 or X year exit plan. And therefore, a lot of these horror stories come from people either pushing the company into the ground or getting it to fly to the exit valuation that it needs to in order to justify the investment that was made at the time, as venture capital, which, for those who don't know it fully, it's a very specific asset class. I'm not an expert on it, but I do know enough about it to say when you sign up for it, you're signing up for a commitment, which is you're accepting a certain amount of capital in exchange for the type of return that the venture capital asset class is expected to yield as a part of a larger portfolio of other companies like yourself doing the same thing. And the return on investment numbers are not very good. And it's because the venture class, or the asset class, was intended to create unicorns, which we've seen over the last couple of decades. It's been successful in doing that. But this podcast I listened to, they basically said 34, 35 million businesses were started last year and only 15,000 of them accepted venture capital. So you really have to understand what you're getting into going into this. And for us, not only did we think we had a shot, we de-risked that by speaking to a number of folks involved in the venture scene early enough, but you also have to know that you are setting yourself up for a potential governance structure, which is going to be stricter than if you just ran your own company as the sole owner and you weren't accountable to other shareholders outside of yourself in said business. But two, we decided to pursue the venture capital asset class because we believe we need that fuel injection from a capital perspective to accelerate us to the level of impact we want to create in the industry. where we either don't get there or we do get there, but we've gotten there too quickly and have created enough of a position where we might be annoying to incumbents in the industry and they might want to shut us down. But at that point, we've gained too much traction to be easily shut down. So it's also about creating a position of defensibility. We could have bootstrapped, crowdfunded. I've had a number of guests on the show who have done those things. We just made a strategic decision early and committed to it. Like any business, you do the best you can with the information you've got. If you don't have the information, go get it, either through research or by talking to others who do know what they're doing. And you continue to make the best decision every day, the best you can, and put one foot in front of the other and hope for the best, with all of the right things behind you making those decisions.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just curious, since you brought it up and it sounds like you put a lot of thought into this. If you could go back, do you think you would have made the same decision?
To go down the VC route,
Mhm.
it's very hard to build software without uh, some sort of capital injection.
Mhm.
I'm still every single day through Exegy Partners, through this podcast, through my own experience with Tonatop, learning more and more about let's call it the funding ecosystem or the capital
Mhm.
ecosystem, and how many different ways there are to get access to capital, not only in the US, but around the world, and how a business needs to be structured to be able to do all these things. But it's still very much a work in progress for me. I am not a multi-exit founder who's done this a bunch, like previous guests I've had on my show, Joey Gilkey, for example, someone I've kept in touch with, and
Nice.
is a prime example of someone who has done it multiple times, knows what they're doing, and I don't want to say I don't, but I haven't exited 3 times. I surround myself with people like him or women like him because I know I don't know everything. So, to answer your question, based on what I wouldn't give back the learning experience. And frankly, I don't know if this specific path that we've chosen with Tonatop could be achieved another way. I have a larger gripe with the ecosystem and how I feel that if you don't come from a certain amount of money, there's only so much you can front at the start end of this. And therefore, how far along can you get something? And I want to do something about that one day. But right now, I'm pursuing venture capital asset class as, or I should say, within the mechanism of how it was created. I had to
Mhm.
find an opportunity that was big enough to justify the returns, to have a shot at getting the capital injections that we have to be able to create those returns and to build something with a relatively high bar from like a product cost perspective to get to market. So I don't
Definitely.
think I don't think I would change it.
I love that. Yeah, you made a decision and it was a good decision. I mean,
Yeah,
kind of maybe even the only decision, like you said, to make it all happen.
it's possible, at least at this stage. I personally feel that the folks I've spoke to at the pre-seed and the seed funding level, um, they've been extremely helpful. I don't
Mhm.
know if in part it's because I am not chasing the AI bubble, and instead I'm talking to fund managers who are involved in disability tech, right? And maybe even got into that space not for trillion-dollar returns, but for uh, creating a capital return that justified the investment, but also making a difference in the world. And whether or not that's affected my treatment as a founder in this VC ecosystem, at least through my experience. But yeah, I think at least where health tech companies get into trouble is when you start taking big chunks of investment at Series A, B, C, D. You start running out of runway to be able to create those multiples. I don't know. I don't have enough experience or knowledge of the entire market, if whether or not that is because health tech runs out of room, or if it's because there are not enough consumers in a specific vertical, right? If the problem isn't big enough. But at
Right.
least right now, our B2B go to market has got plenty of room to grow, plenty of room to create those investments at this early of a stage of venture capital investment. And then, just because you take it early doesn't mean you have to keep taking it. I
That's
think
right.
that's where people
Yeah.
run into problems.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Wow, you've got a lot going on at Tone and Top, and I mean, that's just one of the businesses. But
Yes.
since we're still talking about, your journey here, I'm curious, when you picture the next stage of Tone and Top's journey, like, what excites you the most?
Yeah, I am really excited to watch Tonatop spread across the US into different hearing health clinics and to see the impact it's going to create. So, because we are focusing on oral rehabilitation, which is, think about it more, people think about hearing aids to be like prescription glasses. You put them on, it fixes the problem. When in reality, you need to repair basically the pathways in your brain that hear and interpret sound that have degenerated over the years from the loss of the function and how sound is then sent to your brain. It takes time to repair those. They don't just correct immediately. So you end up in more of what feels like a physical therapy process than you
Mhm.
do in a prescription glasses process or getting a cavity filled. It doesn't happen overnight. So that type of patient engagement is really hard for at least our initial customer market, which is small private independent clinics, hearing health clinics, whether audiology or ENT. And unlike dentists or let's say psychiatrists, most of these folks weren't taught how to run a small business. So if you're a dentist, you do, I don't know if it's called an externship or a fellowship in dentistry, but you work at a practice, right? A small practice, and you see how the business operation runs, not just how the job is done. Most audiologists, they train just at the hospital clinic level. So, but they're like therapists, they're expected to go out and start their own private practice. And so
Mhm.
the majority of folks are struggling with not only patient care, but really the business as a whole, right? They're doing the marketing, the
Mm.
sales. They need to
Yeah,
grow, need to figure out how to manage, scale systems for junior audiologists, seniors, right? Run
gotcha.
the
Sort of like a
business.
dentist. Like a dentist has to be a dentist and a business owner when they yeah.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
dentists are better prepared. So most of these folks are catching up on the small business side their whole
Mhm.
career. And so
Mhm.
when we're talking about some of these longer tailed patient best practices, they just don't have the time or money or even energy, right, to put some of these things in place that are research backed, have been around for a long time. They just have never been really automated. And most of the industry, they just care about point of sale. And what we're talking about is aftercare, right? Basically, patient support and engagement after point of sale of the hearing aid. But the hearing aid is where traditionally where the money's been, right? And so that downstream support hasn't been provided at scale in the way that we hope to start to correct.
So interesting. I love this. Okay, look at we just got a comment again from David. Point of sale versus aftercare, great differentiator, he says. Any
Yeah,
comments to that?
no one really talks about aftercare in the industry. I mean,
Mhm.
as far as I know from my co-founder, every industry conference, someone makes a speech about oral rehabilitation or a similar aftercare. You spend more time with the patient, there are better results, all these different things. But we talk a lot about theory in software and products and solutions, and we forget to acknowledge the reality, right? In product management, you draw out a user journey specifically to see how the solution is going to be used in what environment, through what devices, and at what pressures, right? You consider the whole picture. You literally used to draw out storyboards to give my teams the visual of where are we deploying into, to who is around them, what the problem is that they're trying to solve, and what existing solutions they already have. And this specifically is one of those things that it anything aftercare related, it's mostly a private pay industry today. It's they're making a huge point of sale purchase, the customer, the patient, and most people don't want to pay for much more after that. And so it's a combination of operational issues, or I should say lack of resources inside the clinic, as well as patient education. And by starting with these 20% who are actually seeking help, hopefully through the clinical providers that they're seeing, we can start to educate, and through word of mouth, you can start to penetrate the 80% who aren't doing anything today about it. But we're starting at a point that is actually achievable, and then our ability to impact that 80% up the funnel is going to depend on our continued commercial success and how we funnel our capital into starting to tap into that and providing consumer education more at scale.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I agree with all of that, and the whole aftercare part is really interesting. I mean, it really just shows how much heart, someone's put into something or not. Like, once you're in the ecosystem, do we support you all the way or do we not? Uh,
Yeah. And for what it's worth, it speaks a lot to the entrepreneurial journey. I can't say that word tonight. Entrepreneurial, because my first, again, my first thought with all this was, let's see if we can get captions on glasses, right? And I think that is the obvious solution, and where you see the majority of startups in the industry, it tends to be on the hardware side. How do we produce better hearing aids that people want to actually wear? When in reality, that's not the majority of the problem, right? For most people. And even though I don't come from the industry, all it took was a insatiable curiosity and the somewhat blighted courage of going and finding someone who did work in the industry to surround myself with and to educate myself with. And I'm still learning every single day. But for founders out there who want to do something in an industry that they may not be the most familiar with yet, yes, it does give you a leg up to come from it. But I'm an example that you don't need to have everything in order to be able to start and to get into something, as long as there's enough passion to carry you through that discovery period and to get you to a
yeah,
point where you're humble enough, right, to stay open to new answers.
messy action. We talk about that all
Exactly.
the time. So another aftercare comment question. What role does aftercare lead to other revenue verticals that could potentially be related to that approach?
Yeah, David, it's a really apt question, and one I would expect from someone like you as a go-to-market expert yourself. So aftercare allows us to actually create new potential commercial models for hearing health clinics. If you're emphasizing aftercare and providing education early, you're more likely to set someone up on an engagement model, which is less dependent on hearing aid sales, and let's say is more, or at least subsidized by ongoing patient care, whether it is quarterly, 2 times a year, once a year, hearing aid check-ins, earwax cleanups, maintenance checks, right? Whatever those things are, most people aren't going into an audiologist for that type of routine today, like you would with a dentist or your primary care doctor. So it allows a shift in commercial model to happen, which creates survivability in clinics today, where the majority of their revenue is based on these hearing aid sales. And if people aren't buying $5,000 devices because of the economy, all of a sudden a number of clinics start shutting down, right? So it starts to lateralize, we'll call it revenue for these clinics themselves. But as you start to understand the aftercare model, you get to see, or at least you get to collect more information around, after someone buys something, what do they do? What don't they do? What are they engaging with? Even from a marketing information perspective, I don't know if you're familiar with Noom, their weight loss program, but they disrupted, the incumbent kind of diet only folks by starting to bring it's not psychotherapy. I can't remember the name, but it's more of a psychological support to the process, making it more about outcomes and goals and, I don't know, fitting into that tux you want to wear at your daughter's wedding, right? As opposed to losing 20 pounds. It's very similar for hearing health, and it's more about, do you want to hear the vows at your daughter's wedding, than it is about, can we correct your ears to a certain decibel or correct these certain frequencies, right? So there needs to be a shift in what the consumer responds to and how that continuous motivation continues to drive them forward. And then you could start to see how those outcomes are affected and start to lateralize that data for other folks to take advantage of. Rising tide raises all ships. So in this case, if you find out that certain messages or certain treatment approaches work for one clinic, can you start to make those, as we'll call it AI recommendations, but recommendations to other clinics around the country who are also on the platform? And can you start to elevate patient care as a whole? Can you start to lift up the entire industry? More people are talking about it. More people are happy. More money comes into the industry from a patient perspective. And even the folks who are more focused on point of sale, all of a sudden you start to catch their attention, because the buying groups with the clinics that are on Tonatop ideally are doing more sales and seeing less returns and are ending up with happier patients, which are going to be leading to better satisfaction scores all the way up to the hardware level, right? And whether they know it or not, people will leave a bad review on hardware, even if it was like you'll say the tires are bad. If someone installed them on your car wrong, you know?
Definitely. Yeah. No, this is a good topic. He had a comment on what you were saying. You guys both said outcomes at like the same time. You like literally said it like you were writing it. Outcomes and goals versus a numbers-based method, which makes a ton of sense. I love that approach. How often do you see competitors educate the customers so that all the service providers win?
You don't really see it today. There is, I mean, think about your understanding of hearing aids, Jesse. What do you think about when you hear hearing aids or hearing loss?
I think about my mom and how,
Yeah.
she's not like deaf by any means, but it is a struggle to have a regular conversation with her. So yeah, hearing aids definitely help with that, but also they cause a lot of like issues and they're like expensive and they used to be really clunky. Now they're getting a little better, but
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. I don't think of like a super flawless industry. I think of a flawed industry absolutely when I think of hearing aids.
Yeah. So it's interesting. A lot of the marketing dollars, not that I have access to anyone's books, but my best guess would be what your impression is probably where the majority of the marketing money has gone, right? So you think about the problem, you've associated hearing aids as the solution. You think about the industry as not being terribly efficient or maybe the most advanced, but you have a solution path right in your brain. That is where the majority of the money has gone to date. The conversation we're having about Tonatop, this is the far less talked about piece of the puzzle. And I'll tell you why, in somewhat of a controversial way of thinking about the industry, but it just makes business sense. If I were a manufacturer and I wanted to expand market share, or if I was, anyone making a piece of hardware or solution, you want to expand market share. Sorry, I'm just laughing at David's joke. Um, Insensitive joke, David. Watch yourself. You would try to start controlling supply chain, or start expanding your channels, right? And unfortunately, what's happened in the industry is clinics get bought out, supply chain, like you would see them in strip malls, different stores that are actually associated with hearing aid brands, and they only sell one brand. But you would never know unless you actually follow the books or knew anything about the industry that this hearing aid provider is it just has a sales operation in this strip mall under a different name, right? So this supply chain control, it's obsessed over point of sale and where people buy, as opposed to um, keeping people in the solution long term. Because the reality is, the majority, like the 4 or 5 manufacturers in the industry who are the big, own all of the industry for the most part, they all make incredible technology, right? And it doesn't make sense to me why the downstream piece wouldn't be more supported, right? To drive more sales, to increase retention, to keep people buying hearing aids consistently longer in their life. Other than the fact that when you get down that far, that you start to lose supply chain control, right? My audiology partner,
Mm.
business partner, she can recommend any of the 5 or others of the brands to their patients based on what they think is best. And they ultimately end up mixing and matching a whole bunch of them together anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe there's only 5 brands of them. That's kind of amazing.
5 big ones, right, globally. And then number of different sub brands, as well as there are new entrants coming into that hardware space. Again, which is the most obvious. And it's great to see competition at that level because it forces the incumbents to continue to innovate. You've started to see Apple starting to enter the space a
Mhm.
bit. If you actually go into Apple's accessibility settings, you can upload your audiogram and it will try to start doing sound correction on your AirPods based on
Oh,
your hearing deficiencies. And for some people, that is fine, right? We're just talking about those who are in the moderate to severe hearing loss category. We're not doing anything about minor hearing loss, and it's just getting worse, and you're
mhm.
starting to create those long-term health risks.
Interesting. What would also be interesting is earpod or earbuds or earpods, headphones that tell you that you're losing your hearing, because you
Yeah,
a lot of time I listen to my earbuds and, I think that listening to them too much probably isn't helping my hearing. So if it
it
could be
does give
the
you the
other
volume
way
level. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. We did get another question. As a founder, how do you build in a long-term runway in an industry that's not fueled by the AI bubble? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, speaking just to a few of our early stage investors, they've actually started to advise us against leaning into the AI bubble, specifically for appealing to LPs who are interested in putting money into funds in where AI is the core of the thesis, in which they are raising and then distributing capital. Already, we're starting at least to hear from those who are professionals in the investment market or the private vehicle investment market that AI is starting to kind of reach its. You just don't want to be caught on the side of AI where you have this insanely high return on multiple that is expected of you raising this type of capital, and then soon having the bubble pop and having the knife kind of slice through the pie in a way that you can't stop it, and it starts to affect everyone in the entire industry. So we're actually pulling our conversations with investors away from that. I mean, Tonatop at its core, they're AI as a technology is part of the solution. It is just not the whole thing. So for us, as we think about long-term runway, you have to think about the market penetration strategy as if a technology wasn't the sole thing driving the entire growth of your company. Some companies are built around technology as part of that growth. Ours isn't. So for us, it is more about how many clinics are there out there in the US where we start. Then can we go globally? Are there other revenue channels that we can branch off from there? Can we start to not only help clinics and help patients who have entered those clinics who are using Tonatop, but can we actually start to funnel patients to clinics based on what those clinics are great at treating? So can you actually start moving up the funnel in a way that is productive, creates value for everyone, gets patients to the right solutions, but also allows Tonatop to continue the revenue growth? And as you could probably feel or see or hear, that you can go as far up that funnel as you're brave enough to go. But there's plenty of market size and opportunity for us to go after. Creating that long-term runways is simply right now about finding an entry or a beachhead that is sustainable, viable, has a problem, solving that problem well, and then starting to explore your paths upwards, knowing that the opportunity in the market from a market cap perspective exists. It's just sometimes it's even just patience in getting yourself there and making sure you're nailing the plan one step at a time. But we wouldn't be getting any interest if there wasn't long-term runway as an opportunity available, right? So for founders, who are raising capital, the advice I've received from early stage investors is there's much, yes, they're betting on the first problem that you're solving, but they're not betting on the fact that that is the only problem you're going to solve. A lot of times they're betting on you as a team. And so who you surround yourself with, from co-founder perspective or leadership management perspective, is really just as important as the problem space you're operating in, because they are betting on you early on the fact that you guys are, or gals, are adaptable enough to be able to go out to solve your first problem, but then to be faced with the cascade of problems that are inevitably going to follow that are actually opportunities for you to grow into the market. And how are you going to react to that? Because that's where the big growth is going to happen at scale. And can you as a team come together and adapt and grow into those opportunities as opposed to being hyper-focused on wherever you started just because?
Yeah, definitely. And I can't believe we've already been talking for a full hour. So to kind of wrap us up on all of this, Chris, I'm curious, with all that you have going on, so you're solving a major problem at Tonatop. You've got Exegy partners, building your
Yeah.
first brand, so much more. How do you stay grounded through it all?
It's a constant challenge to stay grounded through all of this. It takes a lot of personal reflection depending on the people around me. So on the personal reflection side, I spend a lot of time with my executive assistant, who helps me ensure that I am, let's say, flowing with the water as opposed to crashing against the waves. When I say flowing with the water, sometimes there is a spike in work in one area and sometimes there's an ebb, and you have the opportunity to redirect your time and attention and energy based on where the activities are in the business. Um, And on the flip side of it, it is about building some of these things from the beginning to enable yourself to scale. And if you haven't done that yet, you don't have to freak out. I just have done something that is a bit more psychotic than most people decide to pursue, which is, yeah, doing a multi, all these things at once. So for me at XG Partners, very, very quickly, that team was built with the intention of, we're equal partners. We can dip in and out of the business as we need to. That will affect our equity vesting for that given quarter. But ultimately, we don't need one specific person for Exegy to continue to exist, sell, market itself, support our clients, all these different things. And that was very intentionally done, knowing that I wanted to start making an impact in, let's say, the founder area of the ecosystem. But I also knew that, well, if Tonatop's successful, I'm going to have to shift to that full time. So you don't have to have all the answers, but if you can have a general sense of where you're going, you can start to plan for it. And the latter I described, those systems and those people, that wouldn't be possible if I didn't have incredible people around me. I mean, the CEO role is glorified, but the reality is that I wouldn't be anywhere in any of my business ventures if I hadn't had the opportunity to meet, to build relationships with, and then to surround myself with people that I trust who are great at doing what they do. And part of that is just figuring out how the pieces of the puzzle come together and keeping everyone, moving forward with momentum, correcting when you need to. But I mean, you see it later on. I've spoken with CEOs of public companies on this show, and those CEOs are not working 180-hour work weeks. They're working regular work weeks because of the scale of the systems of the business that have been put in place. And I think we've over-indexed for way too long on the founder needing to do every early job in an early stage company. I do think it can help, but I'm also a big believer in, I'd rather say I am, for labor law purposes, I'd rather put in less time on the business and take whatever founder stipend that's allocated for me and give it to someone who can do maybe part 1, 2, and 3, right? That I would maybe aren't my strong suits, and I would spend, I don't know, 80 hours of my time that week doing a 50% job on those tasks. I'd rather give that money to someone who knows what they're doing, who can do it twice as fast and 3 times as well. So this fractional ecosystem we live in too allows us to do all that. And Jesse, our relationship, I barely touch my personal brand. I have the opportunity to be able to show up, and it's a testament to you and a testament to your team, and as well as my executive assistant who manages my personal brand. And there are systems in place and escalation points that allow us to continue forward without this being a monster time investment, every day, every week. So you just have to decide where you want to spend your time and how thin you want to spread yourself, and be realistic with, well, then who do you need in place around you, and what do they want in order to make all of this puzzle come together?
Definitely. And I mean, you've done a really great job with that. I mean, Nicole has been awesome to work with.
She's
I
the
remember
best.
she really is, and she has your best interest at mind. She's always been like a stickler of finding all the details. So, you're on your way with all of it. But thank you for sharing a little bit more about Tonatop. I have to say, this is my favorite business of yours. You should talk about it more. We should probably build a Tonatop page.
Yeah, no, we will. I mean, to some extent, we've been in mini stealth, towards the
Totally.
front half of the year,
Yeah.
because it is such a tight industry. We wanted to make sure that when we went public, not public IPO, but just when we put our brand out there and
Yeah.
what we were doing, my co-founder's tie to the industry is so large that it was going to create noise. And, we knew we had one great shot at a go-to-market, so we didn't want to rush it. And it's part of the reason why I haven't talked about Tonatop as much, but it is exciting to be out there and in a position where we now can do so more.
Awesome.
So yeah,
I
it
love
was great to talk about it on the show tonight. It was
Yeah.
nice for me to reconnect with the passion of the business when the day-to-day can sometimes seem so arduous.
Yeah.
And I hope that some of this journey or some of these lessons that I've gained are helpful to the viewers who tune in for the same purpose I am interviewing other guests for each night.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I'll pull myself out of the screen, Chris, so you can close out the show like you normally do.
All right, Jesse, thanks so
Thanks,
much for
everyone.
hopping in as a host tonight.
Of
Really
course.
appreciate
Yeah,
you.
it was a lot of fun. All right. I'll
Yeah.
let you.
All right. So thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's episode of Warm Blooded Founders. It turned out I was the warm blooded founder, and I didn't know it until about 5 minutes in, but I am thrilled and happy to be able to share my experiences with you tonight. They're probably a bit earlier than some of the founders I've had on the show. So if they are helpful, let us know in the comments. That can help inform future guests on the show or some of the content I put out there. If it's helpful, if it's supporting your journey, or if there are gaps in information that you can't find elsewhere, I'm happy to chat about it more. This is the time I usually give to my guests to plug themselves. I've done enough plugging of myself tonight. The one thing I will say is if you like content like this, if you are a warm-blooded founder, if you want to support warm-blooded founders, we do the show every 2 weeks, sometimes more. Actually, I think there's another episode going out this week on Thursday. Follow the show. Follow us on Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Follow the XG Partners LinkedIn page. That's where I've been going live from as of late, as it is a culmination of all of our founder-facing content and all the other things that we do to invest in founders and to help those continue to grow their businesses and to achieve their goals to where they want to get to. So follow the page if you like these. Continue to sign up for and attend the events if you see something that's interesting to you. But otherwise, I just want to thank you as always for joining. I really appreciate you. I am super, super grateful I get to continue to do this, that it's almost been a year. And I can only do it because people continue to insist on tuning in and listening and telling me that it's worth my time and theirs. So I appreciate that. Continue to do so and continue to stay in touch. I am always happy to share my journey with those who are on similar journeys and to offer my support when I can. Thank you again, Jesse, for popping in tonight. And I only had one tone at top in the chamber, so I don't know if we can afford to slot me in last minute again. Jesse, next time we'll have to talk about reveting. But for tonight, we'll call it a wrap. I'm your host, Chris Sherrick. Stay warm-blooded. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.